the gunshot echoing across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory in 1879 changed Tabitha Osborne's life forever, transforming her from a rancher's wife to a 28-year-old widow with 2 children, a failing homestead, and a half-built stone wall that seemed to mock her every morning when she stepped outside to face another day alone. Standing in the doorway of her modest cabin, Tabitha wiped the sweat from her brow as she stared at the pile of stones that had once been her husband's dream, a boundary wall to mark their land claim that now sat unfinished, a testament to all she had lost. Tabitha's children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old James, played in the dirt nearby as she trudged toward the unfinished wall. 6 months had passed since the influenza had taken Nathan, and every morning since, she'd carried stones from the nearby creek to continue his work. 1 stone a day was all she could manage, with everything else demanding her attention: the livestock, the garden, the endless mending, cooking, and caring for the children. "Mama, when are we going to have a real fence like the Hendersons?" Emma asked, her small face pinched with worry beyond her years. "One day, sweet pea," Tabitha replied, lifting a stone that felt heavier than her grief. "1 stone at a time is all we can do." The homestead sat 15 miles from the growing settlement of Willow Creek, far enough that Tabitha felt the isolation keenly, especially when thunderstorms rolled across the plains or when riders passed too close to the property. Women alone in the territories were vulnerable, something the neighboring ranchers knew all too well. As if summoned by her thoughts, the sound of hoofbeats approached from the east. Tabitha dropped the stone and rushed to gather her children, pushing them toward the cabin where her husband's Winchester waited above the door. "Emma, take your brother inside," she commanded, her voice low but firm. "Stay there until I call you." The rider approached slowly, and Tabitha recognized the silhouette against the morning sun, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weather-beaten hat. She'd seen him in town occasionally, always quiet, always watching. He was a stranger to these parts, having arrived only last spring according to the gossip at the general store. "Morning, madam," he called out, stopping his horse a respectful distance away. His voice was deep but gentle, carrying a hint of somewhere east of the Mississippi. "Samuel Thorne. I've taken on work at the Peterson place. Mr. Peterson mentioned you might need some assistance with your livestock." Tabitha straightened, pride stiffening her spine. "We're managing fine, Mr. Thorne." The man Samuel dismounted smoothly, keeping his hands visible. His eyes were the startling blue of a mountain lake, set in a sun-weathered face that spoke of years under open skies. He wasn't young, perhaps 35, but moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. "No disrespect intended, Mrs. Osborne," he said, his gaze drifting to the wall. "That's good stonework your husband started there." Tabitha's throat tightened. "Yes, it was. I've laid a few stone walls in my time," he continued, kneeling to examine the craftsmanship. "Back in Kentucky, my father was known for his stone fences, taught me everything he knew." "We don't have money to hire help, Mr. Thorne," Tabitha said bluntly. Samuel stood, dusting his hands on his worn denims. "Wasn't offering for hire, madam. Just thought I might lend a hand on my days off." "Seems a shame to leave such fine work unfinished." Tabitha studied him, searching for deceit or ulterior motives. She'd heard too many stories of seemingly kind men taking advantage of widows, claiming their land through marriage or intimidation. "Why would you do that?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Samuel's gaze met hers directly. "Because it's what neighbors ought to do." He paused, then added more softly, "and because I know what it's like to be alone with too many burdens to carry." There was something in his voice, a familiar ache that resonated with her own grief. Still, Tabitha hesitated. "I'll think on it," she finally said. "Thank you for the offer." Samuel nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll be by next Sunday after church if you decide you could use the help." He mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Good day, Mrs. Osborne." Tabitha watched him ride away, torn between relief and disappointment. It had been so long since she'd had a proper conversation with anyone besides her children. Even in town, the pitying glances and whispered comments poor Osborne widow made her hurry through her errands. That night, after tucking her children into bed, Tabitha sat by the fire and stared at her calloused hands. 1 stone a day would take years to complete the wall. Years of reminder, years of struggling alone. When Sunday came, Tabitha found herself watching the horizon, the children asking every hour if the man with the nice horse was coming. By mid-afternoon, she had convinced herself he had forgotten his offer or found better ways to spend his day. Then he appeared, riding slowly up the path to their homestead, leading a mule loaded with tools. This time he had removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves, ready for work. "Afternoon, Mrs. Osborne," he called, dismounting. "Hope the offer still stands." For the first time in months, Tabitha felt something other than grief and worry, a tiny spark of hope. "It does, Mr. Thorne," she replied. "Though I insist you stay for supper afterward, it's the least I can do." Samuel's smile transformed his solemn face. "I'd be honored." That afternoon, Tabitha watched in amazement as Samuel moved stone after stone with practiced efficiency, carefully fitting each one to form a sturdy continuation of Nathan's wall. He worked silently for the most part, occasionally asking about Nathan's original vision for the wall or explaining a technique to the children who hovered nearby, fascinated by the stranger. "Your husband had a good eye," Samuel commented as the sun began its descent. "This wall will stand for generations if it's finished right. Nathan wanted it to mark our claim," Tabitha explained. "He said wooden fences rot, but stone stands the test of time." "Wise man," Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "A stone wall is like a statement to the world we're here to stay." That evening, as Samuel washed up at the pump outside, Tabitha prepared a simple meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. The children set the table with unusual care, placing wildflowers in a jar at the center. Conversation flowed more easily than Tabitha expected. Samuel spoke of his travels after the war, his time mining in Colorado, ranching in Texas, and eventually making his way to Wyoming. He asked about her garden, listened intently to Emma's stories, and showed James how to carve a small wooden whistle. As he prepared to leave, Samuel paused at the door. "I can come back next Sunday if you'd allow it. I reckon another day's work would get us to the creek bend." "Us?" Tabitha questioned softly. Samuel's gaze was steady. "I noticed you've been carrying stones yourself. That's hard work for anyone, let alone," he stopped himself. "Let alone a woman," Tabitha finished, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Let alone someone doing it alone," Samuel corrected gently. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Mrs. Osborne. Even stubborn Kentucky boys like me had to learn that lesson." After he left, Tabitha stood in the doorway watching his figure disappear into the gathering darkness, the children already asking when Mr. Sam would return. She touched the rough wood of the doorframe, wondering why the homestead suddenly felt emptier than before. True to his word, Samuel returned the following Sunday and the next. Each week, the wall grew longer, stronger, more deliberate in its winding path across the eastern edge of her property. And each week, something else grew too, a friendship built on shared labor, quiet conversations, and a deepening understanding. By the third Sunday, Emma ran to greet him as soon as his horse appeared on the horizon. By the fifth, James had taken to following Samuel like a shadow, mimicking his movements and soaking up every word of advice like parched soil in the rain. "You've been good for them," Tabitha admitted one evening in early August as they sat on the porch after the children had gone to bed. The air was heavy with the scent of sage and approaching rain. "They haven't smiled this much since before Nathan fell ill." Samuel gazed out at the wall, now extending nearly 100 yards from the cabin. "They're good children, smart too. James has a natural eye for stonework." "He worships you," Tabitha said. "Both of them do." A comfortable silence settled between them before Samuel spoke again. "My wife and I lost a son," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the evening breeze. He'd be about James's age now. Tabitha's heart constricted. I didn't know you were married. I'm not anymore. Samuel's hands tightened on his coffee cup. Caroline died in childbirth along with our second child. That was 8 years ago in Kentucky. I couldn't bear to stay after that, so I headed west. I'm sorry, Tabitha whispered, truly. It's why I understand something of what you're feeling, Samuel continued. That emptiness that follows you everywhere, the way memories ambush you when you least expect it. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the plains in brief electric bursts. The storm was moving closer. Does it ever go away? Tabitha asked, her voice small against the rumbling thunder. Samuel considered her question carefully. No, he finally said, but it changes shape, becomes something you can carry without breaking under its weight. Rain began to fall, fat drops creating dark spots on the dusty ground. Neither moved to go inside, protected by the porch overhang as the world around them transformed into a shimmering curtain of water. You should stay tonight, Tabitha said suddenly. The creek floods in heavy rain. You wouldn't make it back to Peterson's safely. Samuel looked at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Are you certain? I wouldn't want to cause any gossip. I have a reputation for stubbornness, not impropriety, Tabitha replied with a small smile. You can sleep in the barn. It's dry at least. That night, lying in bed listening to the rain hammer against the roof, Tabitha realized something had shifted between them, a door opening to possibilities she had thought forever closed to her. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. When morning came, the world was washed clean, the grass greener, the sky an impossible blue. Samuel was already outside, checking on the animals when Tabitha emerged with coffee. Creek's high, he observed, accepting the steaming cup gratefully. But the wall held firm where it crosses the lowland. Good thing we reinforced that section last week. Tabitha felt a surge of pride. We make a good team. Samuel's eyes met hers over the rim of his cup. Yes, we do. That day, they worked side by side rebuilding a section of barn roof damaged in the storm. The children helped too, forming a human chain to pass up materials. By sunset, when Samuel finally departed with a promise to return the following week, Tabitha found herself standing at the edge of the property long after he disappeared from view. As summer gave way to fall, Samuel's visits became more frequent, sometimes midweek if work at Peterson's allowed, always on Sundays. The wall progressed steadily, but so did something else, something neither of them had named but both felt growing between them, sturdy and enduring as the stones they placed together. The first frost came early that year, painting the prairie grass silver and making their breath cloud in the morning air as they worked. Samuel had brought extra supplies from town, winter provisions, warm fabric for new clothes, books for the long evenings ahead. You don't need to provide for us, Tabitha said as they unloaded the wagon. We can manage. I know you can, Samuel replied simply, but I want to help, if you'll let me. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat closer than usual by the fire, the chill of the night seeping through the cabin walls. Winter comes hard and fast here, Tabitha said, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Last year was difficult. Samuel nodded, his profile gilded by firelight. Peterson's offered me the foreman position permanently, asked me to stay through winter and beyond. Tabitha's heart quickened. And will you? Samuel turned to face her fully. That depends. On what? On whether there's reason enough to put down roots here. His voice was steady, but Tabitha could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear of rejection, of opening himself to loss again. Samuel, she began, then paused, gathering her courage. The wall will be finished before the first heavy snow, his brow furrowed slightly. Yes, I reckon it will. And then what? She asked softly. Will you find another project, another widow to help? Something flashed in his eyes, hurt perhaps, or indignation. Is that what you think this has been about, charity? No, Tabitha admitted. I think it started as kindness, but it's become something else, hasn't it? Samuel reached for her hand, his touch warm and calloused. Tabitha, I haven't felt alive since Caroline died. Not until I started building that wall with you. Not until I saw how you carry your grief with such dignity, how you love your children, how you refuse to surrender to circumstance. Tabitha's eyes filled with tears. I was so angry when you first offered to help. Angry that I couldn't do it alone, angry that Nathan left me with so much unfinished. I know, Samuel said gently, but walls aren't meant to be built alone, neither is a life. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves. Inside, something fragile and precious hung in the balance between them. I care for you, Tabitha, Samuel continued when she remained silent. More than I thought possible, I care for Emma and James too, but I won't presume. Tabitha leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, stopping his words. The kiss was brief, tentative, but filled with promise. Stay, she whispered as she pulled away. Not in the barn, not as a visitor, stay with us. Samuel's face transformed with hope. Are you certain? People will talk. Let them, Tabitha replied with newfound confidence. We'll give them something worth talking about. 3 days later, they rode into Willow Creek together, the children bouncing excitedly in the wagon bed. Their first stop was the church, where the surprised pastor agreed to marry them that very afternoon. Their second was the land office, where Samuel filed paperwork adding his name to the Osborne homestead deed. The ceremony was simple, witnessed by Peterson and his wife, the general store owner, and a handful of curious townsfolk drawn by the news that the Osborne widow was remarrying the quiet newcomer who'd been seen riding to her property for months. Do you, Samuel Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? The pastor asked, his voice echoing in the small church. I do, Samuel replied, his eyes never leaving Tabitha's face. And do you, Tabitha Osborne, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Tabitha squeezed Samuel's hands. I do. That night, after the children had been tucked in with stories of their new family adventure, Tabitha and Samuel stood outside in the moonlight, looking at the nearly complete wall that had brought them together. It's beautiful, Tabitha said, leaning against Samuel's solid warmth. More than Nathan could have imagined. It's a beginning, Samuel replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. Our beginning. As winter descended on the Wyoming Territory, the Thorne family faced the harsh season with preparations made solid by shared effort. The wall was completed just before the first heavy snowfall, a boundary not to keep others out, but to declare their permanence on the land they now shared. Inside their cabin, warmed by fire and newfound love, they created new traditions. Samuel carved toys for the children, taught James to whittle, and helped Emma with her reading. Tabitha sewed new curtains, baked bread that filled the home with comforting aromas, and gradually moved Nathan's things to make space for their shared life. Do you think Papa would be angry? Emma asked one night as Samuel brushed her hair before bed. Samuel's hands stilled. Why would you think that, little one? Because we're happy now, she whispered. And he's not here. Tabitha, overhearing from the doorway, came to sit beside them. Your papa loved you more than anything in this world, she said gently. All he ever wanted was for us to be safe and happy. And we're building on what he started, Samuel added. That wall out there, it's part his work, part ours, just like this family. The winter nights were long but no longer lonely. Tabitha discovered the joy of sharing her bed, her thoughts, her fears with someone who understood loss but chose hope instead. Samuel found purpose in providing for the family he'd never expected to have, in watching the children grow, in Tabitha's smile each morning. When spring arrived, bringing new calves to their small herd and fresh growth to their expanded garden, Samuel surprised Tabitha with plans for an addition to the cabin. We'll need more space, he explained, showing her the careful drawings he'd made during the winter evenings. Especially if our family grows. Tabitha's hand went instinctively to her stomach, still flat but harboring a secret she'd only just begun to suspect. Samuel, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I think it might grow sooner than we planned. His eyes widened as her meaning registered. Are you certain? Not entirely, she admitted. But I've been feeling the same as I did with Emma and James, different somehow. Samuel swept her into his arms, his laughter mingling with hers as he spun her around the yard. A baby, he marveled, our baby. The wall stood witness to their joy, solid and enduring against the backdrop of an endless blue sky. Throughout the summer, as Tabitha's condition became more apparent, Samuel worked tirelessly expanding the cabin, improving the livestock pens, and teaching James and Emma to ride the gentle mare he'd purchased specifically for them. The homestead flourished under their combined efforts, attracting favorable comments from neighbors who had once whispered about the poor Osborne widow. "You've transformed this place," Peterson remarked during a visit in late August. "Hardly recognize it from a year ago." "We both have," Samuel replied, watching Tabitha in the garden, her rounded belly evident beneath her apron as she showed Emma how to tell when tomatoes were perfectly ripe. "She carried the stones, I just helped build the wall." "Seems to me you built a lot more than that," Peterson observed with a knowing smile. In October, as the aspen trees turned golden and the nights grew crisp, Tabitha gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named David after Samuel's father. The midwife from town declared him the strongest newborn she'd seen all year, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered, cradling his son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Thank you for this second chance, Tabitha, for all of this." Emma and James crowded around, wide-eyed with wonder at their new brother. "Can we show him the wall when he's bigger?" James asked. "Of course," Tabitha replied, exhausted but radiant, "and we'll tell him the story of how it brought our family together." That winter was milder than the previous one, as if the weather itself blessed their expanded family. The cabin, now larger and more comfortable, became a gathering place for neighboring homesteaders. Tabitha's cooking and Samuel's stories drew people in, creating a community where once there had been isolation. By the following spring, as David took his first tentative steps in the yard, Samuel and Tabitha began planning another addition this time, a proper school building. With more families settling in the area, the need for education was growing. "We could donate that corner of our land," Samuel suggested one evening as they walked along the wall that had started it all. "Build something the whole community can use." "Nathan would have liked that," Tabitha said, leaning into his embrace. "He always believed in building something lasting." "As do I," Samuel replied, stopping to repair a small section of the wall that winter frost had loosened. His hands, once those of a wanderer, now moved with the confidence of a man rooted in purpose and place. 5 years passed, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The small school was built and flourished under the guidance of a young teacher from back east. Emma, now 13 and showing a talent for numbers, helped with younger students after her own lessons. James, 11 and his stepfather's shadow, could build a stone wall nearly as well as Samuel. David, a robust 5-year-old with his father's curiosity and his mother's determination, had been joined by a sister, Caroline, named for the mother Samuel had lost but never forgotten. The homestead had grown 2 more cattle, better yields from carefully tended fields, a reputation for the finest stone masonry in 3 counties, thanks to Samuel's skilled hands. The wall had been extended to encircle their enlarged property, each new section representing another year of their life together. On the anniversary of their wedding, Samuel took Tabitha to the spot where they'd completed the first wall section together. "I've been thinking," he said, taking her hands in his, "about what it means to build something that lasts." Tabitha smiled up at him, the lines around her eyes speaking of both laughter and occasional tears in their years together. "And what have you concluded, Mr. Thorne?" "That the strongest walls aren't made of stone at all," he replied, pulling her close. "They're made of promises kept, of weathering storms together, of teaching our children what matters most." "Which is?" Tabitha asked, though she already knew the answer. "Love," Samuel said simply. Love stubborn enough to carry stones one by one when the burden seems impossible. Love patient enough to build carefully, stone upon stone, day after day. In the distance, their children's laughter carried on the wind as they played near the cabin that had grown from a widow's struggling homestead to the heart of a thriving family. "I'm glad you stopped that day," Tabitha said softly. "I'm glad I let you stay." Samuel kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "So am I, my love, so am I." As the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the land they had transformed together, Tabitha and Samuel walked hand in hand along the wall that had once represented an unfinished dream, and now stood as testament to a promise fulfilled not just of boundaries marked, but of lives intertwined, of strength found in sharing burdens, of love built stone by stone until it stood strong enough to withstand whatever the frontier might bring. "Mama, Papa," Emma called from the porch. Supper's ready. Together they turned toward home, toward the future they continued to build one day, one stone, one moment at a time.